There is one thing that doesn't make sense about Joyboy's story. How was Joyboy the first pirate ever? Yet at the same time, he supposedly represented the Ancient Kingdom in the Void Century War. What exactly was Joyboy's status in the Ancient Kingdom? Was he a criminal, a rebel, an outcast, a maverick, a champion, a king? What we've been presented with is the story of a man who seemed to be a foundational member of the Ancient Kingdom, the forebearer of the Will of D. Remember, it was Joyboy whose messages we've been reading throughout the poneglyphs so far. Joyboy is the one who apologized to the Fishman people, the one who left the truth behind at Laughtale, the one who the world has been awaiting the return of for the dawn. Everywhere we see the remnants of the Ancient Kingdom and the will that has been passed down, it seems as though it is Joyboy's legacy, as though the Ancient Kingdom's legacy is Joyboy's legacy. And so how does that make sense with the fact that Joyboy was also a pirate at the time, and in fact considered to be the first ever pirate? Well, it's simple. The story of Joyboy is that of a pirate who became a king. Both sides of his story are true. And in fact, we know this as every single beat of Joyboy's story that we've heard of so far is an identical parallel to the story of another character who lived the same dual life of pirate and king. Oden. That's right, the Wano storyline is where we first learned all of the deeper lore and legend surrounding Joyboy, and that's precisely why the Wano storyline centered around the story of Oden, whose entire tale is crystal clear foreshadowing of Joyboy's tale. So let me break down for you how clear Joyboy's full story becomes the moment that we view it through the lens of what the Wano arc was actually telling us. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more videos every week. So to begin with, the big discrepancy we seem to have is in how seemingly the entire Will of D and legacy of the Ancient Kingdom that has been left behind has been all in Joyboy's name. He's the one who had the poneglyphs left behind as seen by his message on the Fishman Island poneglyph and his message at Laughtale. He's the one that pretty much everyone talks about today when it comes to the Ancient Kingdom. All the history that has been left behind of the Ancient Kingdom is tied to him, and it sounds as though the Void Century War centered around defeating Joyboy himself as the champion of the Ancient Kingdom. In fact, the entire war came to a conclusion after his defeat. So how does Joyboy begin as a pirate but then come to represent the Ancient Kingdom in the final war? It's all spelled out for us in the story of Oden. To begin with, we can assume that Joyboy wasn't a pirate in the traditional evil sense like Kaido or Big Mom, where they plunder, murder, and steal from innocent people. Rather, we can assume that Joyboy was a pirate for the same reason that Luffy and Roger are considered pirates, due to their desire for freedom and operating outside the rigid rules that authority attempts to lay down upon them. But how would Joyboy have been the first pirate? Well, we have an identical scenario in Oden. Oden lived in a once splendorous kingdom, the mighty nation of Wano. It was vast and powerful, but it was extremely restrictive. Wano was not interested in interacting with the rest of the world, and so it wanted its people to stay within the nation. Oden was this mighty warrior of Wano who felt suffocated by this nation's borders and rigidity. While he was the strongest fighter in the nation, and was even destined to one day rule it as shogun, Oden didn't care for this role, and instead repeatedly kept attempting to escape this nation. Finally, Oden succeeds, breaking free of the borders of Wano and embarking on a grand adventure to see the rest of the world. Oden was the first, quote-unquote, pirate of Wano, despite also being a beloved son of the nation, a respected warrior that many hoped would one day rule the land. Now, while Oden was out and about on his grand adventures, what happened? A mighty force came down upon the land. Kaido and the Beast Pirates, as well as Orochi of course, seeked to take over Wano and bring down the great nation. Oden finally returned from his adventures as a pirate with crucial knowledge that was important for the land, and now he was even ready to take on his role as leader of the great nation. The people celebrated his return and supported him as the long-awaited champion of the country, a pirate who had returned to take his role as the rightful king. Of course, when the fateful battle happened, Oden and his scabbards failed to defeat Kaido, and their defeat marked the end of Wano's hopes. After Oden and the scabbards fell, the rest of the nation fell, and the new, evil regime officially took over the land. But with Oden's final moments, he was able to pass on a will, the will of the Kazuki. While the clan had fallen and the nation had fallen for the moment, the will could be passed on down to a fateful time 20 years in the future, when another battle can take place to bring the dawn to Wano. In that battle, the new evil ruling regime will be defeated, and the will of the Kazuki and the old Wano that once was will rise up again. That is exactly how the events of the Wano storyline played out. Now think about how remarkably similar that sounds to what the story of Joyboy was likely like. So to begin with, the simple fact that Joyboy was the first pirate can mean only one thing: that Joyboy was the first person to take to the seas and seek freedom. Nobody else from the Ancient Kingdom would have been sailing the seas before Joyboy. That's because, if during this era of the Ancient Kingdom, sea travel was already common and everyone was already allowed to travel out and about on the ocean, then it would be impossible for Joyboy to be the first pirate, since piracy would already have been a thing. Literally, it doesn't make sense otherwise. If you have hundreds or thousands of people already sailing the seas, then you would obviously have some criminals here or there, or some sailors who did bad things. There's no such thing as a first in this regard. It's just natural that in any system of humans, there are inherently going to be some bad actors. It's like, how would you even determine who the first pirate is in our own real-world history? You can't, because it makes no sense. As soon as ships and sailing are common, so too would there be some degree of crime on the seas. If we also take into account the One Piece staple of good characters being labeled pirates simply for desiring freedom, then the only way Joyboy, as the clear, undisputed first pirate in history, makes sense is if nobody was even traveling the seas before him, because it was against the laws of the Ancient Kingdom, and Joyboy's simple act of taking to the seas against the laws of the Ancient Kingdom was enough to label him a pirate. As the only person to take off to the seas from the Ancient Kingdom, in clear disregard for their laws that likely existed at the time, it's easy to understand how history could clearly have identified Joyboy as the first pirate ever. It's identical to Oden's story, in that both Oden and Joyboy were born into great kingdoms and were likely well known and even respected in their kingdoms, but they both longed to leave said kingdom and explore the world beyond. Even though these acts were against the norms of their time, Oden and Joyboy did them anyway. In Oden's case, that made him the first pirate from Wano, and in Joyboy's case, that would have made him the first pirate, period. In this manner, it's entirely possible that despite technically being a pirate, Joyboy, like Oden, would have been welcomed back and treated as the champion of the kingdom when it came time to drive out the evil forces attacking the kingdom. In Oden's case, it was against Kaido and the Beast Pirates. In Joyboy's case, it was against Imu and the 20 Kingdoms. In fact, just as Oden was royalty in Wano who chose to become a pirate, perhaps Joyboy was part of the royal family of the Ancient Kingdom. After all, we still don't fully understand the lineage of the Will of D, and what it means to be part of the D tribe, but it does sound remarkably close to the will of the Kazuki that was passed down through the people of Wano. What we do know is that Joyboy was the clear champion of the Ancient Kingdom in the Void Century War, and that pretty much all the history and legacy of the Ancient Kingdom is in his name, in near identical fashion to Oden and his role in the Wano War and how his legacy was then carried out in the aftermath. As such, Joyboy's status and legacy as the symbol of the entire Ancient Kingdom doesn't make much sense if he was just a criminal, but it makes a lot more sense if we apply the lens of Oden to Joyboy's story. If we assume that Joyboy was always an integral figure in the Ancient Kingdom, perhaps even royalty, who simply chose to leave and explore the world temporarily, therefore becoming a quote-unquote pirate for some time, but was then still welcomed back as the rightful leader and champion of the Ancient Kingdom when the time for war came. And one of the most interesting pieces of evidence that this was the case is in how the battle between Oden and the Beast Pirates went, and how it perfectly explains how the battle between Joyboy and Imu and the 20 Kingdoms likely went. When Oden stepped up with his scabbards to fight Kaido and the Beast Pirates, Oden failed. But he didn't actually lose to Kaido in a fair fight. Oden actually even got the upper hand, but he was defeated due to trickery. Kaido fanboys may be upset by this, but it shouldn't be controversial at all, as a literal defining aspect of Kaido's character is how embarrassed Kaido is by the unfair manner in which he beat Oden, and how much Kaido is still haunted by that shame to this day. So Oden lost to Kaido not because Oden was too weak, but because of cheating by his enemies. That is an extremely important point, as this is pretty much never the case in One Piece ever. Countless times we come across islands where the story is that the previous champion of the island was defeated because the villain was just too strong to be beaten, and therefore the will needs to be passed down to someone else in the modern day, aka Luffy, to defeat the villain instead. We see this with Jen in Kokoyashi Village, Dalton in Drum Kingdom, Gonfall in Skypiea, Riku in Dressrosa. It's just extremely common for the original Guardian of the Land to be too weak, so that then Luffy can be the one to step up and defeat the villain in the modern day. But Oden is the first and only known case in One Piece where the old school original Guardian of the Land was in fact possibly too strong for the villain, and so the original Guardian of the Land actually had to be defeated through underhanded tactics instead, in order for the evil regime to take over. This would make a lot of sense if the reason that Oden's story is unique in this regard is that he is supposed to reflect the story of Joyboy and how Joyboy was defeated. Think about it. We all expect Joyboy to be extraordinarily powerful, maybe the most powerful character in history right next to Imu. Joyboy was essentially Luffy before Luffy, with the same abilities but likely far more refined. I can certainly imagine that Joyboy wasn't defeated straight up by Imu, but rather that there was some underhanded tactic at play that allowed Imu to get the better of Joyboy. If you're curious whether that means that Kaido is supposed to be a parallel to Imu, well, it's a little more complicated than that. It's more so what Kaido and Orochi together represent, which I explain in detail in my weekly podcast that you can get by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. But that aside, here is where the story of Oden most precisely seems like a mirror to the story of Joyboy. First of all, we know that the nation of Wano falls immediately after Oden, the champion of the kingdom, was defeated. This is made very clear: Wano fell when Oden fell. And in the exact same way, it is made clear that the ancient kingdom fell when Joyboy was defeated. But where it gets interesting is the striking parallel in the idea of leaving behind a will to be fulfilled years in the future to bring the dawn. After Oden is defeated, all is not lost as he leaves behind this will, one could say the will of the Kazuki, wherein he passes down his legacy and his message to the future, for a day 20 years down the line where a war will be fought for Wano, and the land will be freed. Oden's wife, Toki, who dies with him, is the one who specifically spells out the will of the Kazuki, that in 20 years' time, Kaido and Orochi will fall, and the dawn will return to Wano. And what do you know, 20 years in the future, we see the Scabbards telling Kaido that they are fighting him to bring back the dawn to the land, which they succeed in doing. This is exactly the same as Joyboy's story, except Joyboy's is on a far larger scale. Joyboy is defeated, the ancient kingdom falls, but with Joyboy's final efforts, he is able to leave behind a will, a message to the future in the form of the poneglyphs, and promises to his allies. The entire Will of D passed down through the centuries is Joyboy's will for the future. For when 800 years down the line, a war will be fought for the fate of the world, and the ancient kingdom's legacy will rise up once again. Just as 20 years in the future the Kazuki's will rose up again to defeat Kaido and Orochi and bring the dawn to Wano, in 800 years the Will of D will rise up again to defeat Imu and the Celestial Dragons, and the dawn will come to the world. And if you are still doubting the idea that Oden's story spells out Joyboy's story for us, consider this. The entire Wano arc was specifically about the idea of Joyboy. Remember, before Wano, we didn't know shit about Joyboy or the Dawn. We'd barely even heard the Dawn mentioned at all. We'd only ever heard Joyboy's name once, and that was just that he was some random dude apologizing to the fishmen for some reason. But in the Wano arc, that's when it all came together. That's where we found out that this whole story, all of One Piece, has been in the wake of one man's will: Joyboy. Laugh Tale, the ancient weapons, the One Piece, and most importantly, the dawn of the world, all of it is tied back to Joyboy. The whole Wano arc is about preparing for Joyboy's return. Everyone from Roger to Kaido to the ancient races are trying to figure out the return of this legendary Joyboy. And the climax of the arc itself is exactly that, the return of Joyboy. That is the culmination of the Wano arc. That's what all of this was leading towards. Joyboy is the single most important central concept to the Wano storyline. So look again at the story of Oden and its true significance to the Wano arc. Wano's storyline is all build up to Joyboy, which is why Oden's backstory is all foreshadowing the story of Joyboy. The story of a man born into a great kingdom, destined to rule in that kingdom, but who chooses instead to rebel and chase freedom, breaking the norms of his kingdom to venture out into the world and being labeled a pirate. But when his kingdom falls under attack from outside forces, the prodigal son returns, the long-awaited champion of the kingdom that the people pin their hopes on to protect them. The hero fails, very likely due to the enemy's trickery, and the fall of the hero results in the fall of the kingdom. All seems lost as the evil enemy forces take over, but in the hero's final moments he passes on a great will to the future, a message and legacy to be carried out, of a war that will be fought many years down the line, where the will of the defeated kingdom will rise up once again to overthrow the evil regime and bring back the dawn. That is the story of Joyboy. Not just a pirate, but a central figure of the ancient kingdom, whose only crime was to leave its borders. He returned to defend the ancient kingdom in the Great War, and though he failed, the will that he left behind is what all the main characters have been chasing today. A will that will one day lead to the fall of Imu and the Celestial Dragons, the revival of the D tribe, and the dawn of the world. So let me know how the story of Joyboy sounds to you in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear how Orochi and Kaido's story foreshadows Imu's story, then you can listen to my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.